Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am incredibly pumped for today's session.
Me too.
We are doing something a little special today, a special edition of the Deep Dive that's been, curated specifically for the Simplified UPSC by PPP community.
That's right.
If you're tuning in right now, you aren't just looking for entertainment.
No, not at all.
You're likely looking to get a serious competitive edge on your preparation, and we are here to deliver exactly that. We're taking the heavy lifting out of your study routine and turning it into a conversation.
It's great to be here. And yes, today is going to be dense, but in the best way possible. We are tackling a topic that is it's fundamental, not just for economics, but for international relations, for understanding India's place in the world.
Absolutely.
We are going deep, and we are not coming up for air until we understand exactly what is happening in our neighborhood. I mean, this is the bedrock of understanding the Asian century.
We're looking at our neighbors. And before we crack the code on India's economic neighbors, I have a quick request.
A very important one.
Look, we're putting a massive amount of work into these breakdowns to make sure they're exam ready. If you find value in these deep dives, please hit subscribe. It really, really helps the channel grow and allows us to reach more learners like you.
It makes a huge difference.
And if you are capable and you want to keep this train moving, support us on Patreon so we can keep bringing this super useful content to you.
And on that note, a massive, massive shout out to all the current supporters.
Yes.
You folks are the engine behind this entire operation. We appreciate every single one of you. It's what allows us to dig this deep into the research.
Seriously, thank you so, so much. Also, a quick reminder, don't forget to like the video or audio and share your valuable comments below. We read them, and they really do help us refine what we do.
We do read them.
And for the serious learners, listen up. Free notes with practice PYQs are available on our Telegram channel.
The free notes are great, but if you want the full package...
Right. If you want access to all videos in this series, organized premium notes, detailed notes, extra PYQs, and model mains answers, you need to join the private Telegram library.
And how do they do that?
Just DM on the public Telegram channel to join. It's that simple.
You know, the premium notes are a game changer for revision. I mean, especially the model mains answers. When you're prepping for the mains, having those model answers organized for you, that's half the battle won.
It saves you hours.
So many hours of structuring time. I highly recommend checking that out.
Okay, let's unpack the mission for today. We are taking a microscope to NCERT Class 11 Economics, Chapter 10.
The big one.
The big one. The title is Comparative Development Experiences of India and its Neighbors. And specifically, we're looking at the big two, China and Pakistan.
This is such a critical chapter. It's so easy to get lost in the weeds of India's own economy, right? You know, inflation rates, repo rates, our own budget.
But you get tunnel vision.
Exactly. But you can't understand your own performance without a benchmark. It's like running a race. You need to know how fast the other runners are going to know if you're actually doing well or just, jogging while thinking you're sprinting.
That's a great way to put it. And some might ask, why study the neighbors? Is it just about being nosy, like looking over the fence to see if their grass is greener?
Yeah, it's a bit more strategic than that.
Or is there something deeper here? Why does the NCERT dedicate a whole chapter to this?
It's because in a globalized world, we aren't operating in a vacuum. We have limited economic space. We are all competing for the same export markets, the same foreign investment, the same resources.
So it's competitive intelligence.
Precisely. As the NCERT text puts it, it's about understanding our own strengths and weaknesses by looking at them. If China is producing steel cheaper, why? If Pakistan is struggling with textiles, why? These aren't abstract questions. They affect Indian jobs.
It reminds me of that quote. Was it JFK?
It was. John F. Kennedy. He said, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies."
That really sums it up.
It does. Because even when politics makes us adversaries, economics binds us. And in our region, we have all these groupings like SAARC, ASEAN, the G20, BRICS. To navigate those, you need to know the economic DNA of the players involved.
Exactly. You can't sit at the negotiating table at the G20 if you don't understand the economic leverage China holds or the structural challenges Pakistan is facing. You'd be flying blind.
Totally blind. And for a developing country like India, understanding the development strategies of our neighbors is essential because we are all fighting for that same limited economic space in world markets.
Okay, so here's the roadmap for today. We're going to break this down systematically. First, we are going to look at the history, the developmental paths these three countries took. How did they start? What were the big decisions?
Then we look at the people, the demographic indicators. Who lives there? How fast are they growing? And where do they live? Because, that dictates the future workforce.
Then we get into the money and the jobs,
Yeah.
GDP and sectoral shifts.
And that's where some real surprises are hidden.
I think so, too. We assume we know who makes money how, but the data might shock you.
After that, we'll check the scorecard on human development, health, education, the quality of life stuff. This is the real measure of success, isn't it?
It has to be.
It's not just about building factories. It's about whether people are living better, healthier, longer lives.
And finally, we will wrap it all up with an appraisal of their strategies. And this is key. Throughout this entire deep dive, we are going to be linking these concepts to past year questions, or PYQs.
Yes.
So you can see exactly how this theory translates into exam marks.
That PYQ linkage is so vital. It's one thing to know the theory. It's another thing entirely to use it to answer a question like the ones we see in General Studies Paper 3 or even Paper 2. We want you to be able to take this audio and immediately apply it to writing a better, more structured answer.
Okay, let's dive into part 1. The starting line. When I was reading the source material, I was actually surprised by how similar the starting conditions were.
It is striking, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like they're so different now. China is this superpower.
Yeah.
Pakistan is, often in crisis. India is rising. But they were basically triplets separated at birth.
That's a great way to put it. We tend to think of China as this economic alien, something totally separate. But look at the timeline.
Okay.
India got independence in 1947. Pakistan, same year, 1947, and the People's Republic of China was established just 2 years later, in 1949.
So they all essentially hit the go button on modern development at almost the exact same time, within a 2-year window.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that despite having totally different political systems...
Completely.
Right. India with its secular democracy, Pakistan with its militarist political power structure, and China with a command economy. Their economic strategies were almost identical in the beginning.
Wow. So different politics, same economic starting blocks.
It's a fascinating historical quirk. They were all fans of the plan, right? Central planning was the flavor of the decade.
Big time.
Yeah.
You have to remember the context here. This is post-World War II. The Great Depression had made capitalism look really unstable.
Right. The free market didn't look so great.
Not at all. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union had shown that state-led industrialization could supposedly work fast. So everyone wanted a piece of that action.
So they all adopted 5-year plans. India started its first plan in the 1951-56 period.
Okay.
China announced its first 5-year plan in 1953.
Right behind.
And Pakistan announced its first 5-year plan in 1956, though back then they called it the Medium-Term Development Plan.
It's like they were all reading from the same textbook, How to Build a Nation 101.
Well, in a way, they were. The prevailing economic wisdom of the post-war era was state-led growth. The private sector was seen as too weak or maybe too predatory to handle nation building.
And government had to be in the driver's seat.
Exactly. The driver, the navigator, and the mechanic. So, all three created a large public sector. They didn't trust the private market to lift them out of poverty.
And they poured money into social programs.
A lot of it. They all raised public expenditure on social development.
So for a long time, were they running neck and neck?
Yes. And this is a fact that often gets forgotten in the current narrative. Until the late 1980s, all three countries had similar growth rates and, importantly, similar per capita incomes.
So if you were a betting person in 1980...
If you looked at a graph in 1980, you wouldn't necessarily predict that China would skyrocket and the others would lag. You might have even bet on Pakistan or India. The great divergence happens after the 1980s.
That is the cliffhanger, what happened in the 80s. But before we get there, we need to understand what they were doing individually in that pre-divergence era. Let's unpack China first, part 2, the Dragon's Path.
China is a fascinating case study in extremes. After the establishment of the People's Republic of China under one-party rule, they went all in. All critical sectors of the economy, enterprises, and lands owned and operated by individuals were brought under government control.
Total control. So no private business, no mom-and-pop shops, nothing.
Zero. Everything belongs to the state. The state decides what's produced, who produces it, and who gets it. And they had some, let's call them ambitious campaigns.
Ambitious is one word for it.
This source material talks at length about the Great Leap Forward in 1958.
Right, the GLF. This was Mao's attempt to industrialize the country on a massive scale, almost overnight. The slogan was essentially industrializing in your backyard.
It was literal. They literally encouraged people to set up industries in their backyards. Imagine making steel in your garden next to the vegetables.
That sounds inefficient.
The idea was to decentralize industrialization, to make every citizen a producer. They wanted to surpass the industrial output of Britain and America in just a few years. It was wildly optimistic.
But the really big change was in agriculture, right? This commune system.
Yes. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding why China struggled so much initially. They abolished individual farming completely.
So you didn't own your land anymore?
You didn't even use your land anymore. They created these massive communes. People collectively cultivated the land. By 1958, there were 26,000 communes covering almost the entire farm population of China.
And you didn't own your crop?
The commune did. You just worked. You ate in a communal kitchen. Your kids were in a communal daycare. The idea was to free up labor for the backyard industries.
Okay, so on paper, it's a massive mobilization of labor. Did it work?
It was a disaster, a catastrophic failure on an unimaginable scale. The GLF met with havoc.
How?
Well, for one, that backyard steel. It was often low quality and completely unusable, just, pig iron that crumbled. They were melting down wokes and door handles to make it. But worse, much worse, a severe drought hit China at the same time.
And because the system was so rigid, it couldn't cope.
Exactly. When you have a command economy, bad news doesn't flow up. Local officials were terrified to report that the harvest was failing.
They'd be punished.
They'd be seen as failures or counter-revolutionaries, so they lied. They reported record harvests while people were starving to death in their own villages.
Oh, my.
The combination of bad policy, a culture of fear, and bad weather led to a famine that killed. Estimates vary, but the consensus is around 30 million people.
30 million. That's a number so large, it's hard to even comprehend.
The population of a medium-sized country just wiped out by policy and famine.
And on top of that, they had issues with Russia,
Yeah.
the Soviet Union.
Right. At the same time, the Sino-Soviet split happened. Russia, the Soviet Union, had conflicts with China, and they withdrew their professionals who had earlier been sent to help in the industrialization process.
So they were on their own.
Completely isolated. A broken agricultural system, a stalled industrial system, and no technical help.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, came the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 1966.
Another massive, massive disruption. In 1965, Mao introduced this revolution from 1966 to 1976 for a full decade.
The decade.
Students and professionals were sent to work and learn from the countryside.
Learn from the countryside. That sounds nice on the surface, but what did it actually mean?
It meant universities were closed. It meant research stopped. It effectively halted normal economic activity and education for 10 years. You had doctors farming potatoes. You had brilliant engineers feeding pigs.
It was an attack on intellectuals.
A direct attack on the intellectuals and the bourgeoisie. It was chaos. It was about ideological purity, not economic growth.
So, looking at this whole picture, the famine, the failure of the Great Leap Forward, the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, you'd think China was finished. You would look at that country in 1976 when Mao died and say, this is a failed state.
And many people did. But here's the nuance, and this is what a good UPSC answer needs to spot. Despite all these horrific failures, this period did build a foundation.
A foundation. How?
The state, for all its brutality, did ensure some basic health services and basic education reached the grassroots level. It was crude, the barefoot doctors, village schools, but it was universal.
So literacy and basic health improved.
Yes, everyone could read a little. Everyone had basic vaccinations. That social infrastructure, a relatively healthy and literate workforce, is what paid off massively when they finally opened up. They had the human capital ready to go.
Okay, so that brings us to the turning point. 1978, the reforms. This is where it all changes.
This is where the divergence begins. The party, after Mao, realized the command model just wasn't delivering growth. But, and this is the key point, they didn't just copy the West. They didn't do shock therapy like Russia did later.
Right. The source material mentions a phased approach. They didn't just open the floodgates overnight.
No, that would have been chaos. They were methodical. Phase 1 was agriculture.
Back to the farms.
Back to the farms. Remember those communes? They broke them up. They divided the land into small plots.
So they privatized the land, gave it back to the farmers.
Not exactly. This is a very Chinese characteristic. Ownership of the land remained with the state.
Ah. Okay.
But the use of the land, the right to farm it, was allocated to individual households. And here was the genius move, the incentive. They could keep all the income from the land after paying stipulated taxes.
Incentives matter. It's simple human psychology. If I work harder, I earn more.
And instantly, productivity shot up, food production boomed. Once agriculture was stabilized and the country was fed, they moved to phase 2, industry.
How do they reform industry?
They allowed the private sector to come back in. Crucially, they encouraged township and village enterprises, or PVEs. These were local collectives, often run by the village government, that were allowed to produce goods for the market.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The dual pricing system. This sounds like a brilliant hack to transition an economy. Can you explain that?
It was a stroke of absolute genius in transition economics. Imagine you're a farmer or a factory owner. The government comes to you and says, you must produce X amount of rice or steel, and you must sell it to us at this fixed low price.
Okay, that sounds like the old socialist system. No profit there.
It is. That's the state ensuring its own supply. But then they say, anything you produce above that quota, you can sell that on the open market at whatever price you can get.
I see. So the government gets its security food for the cities, steel for infrastructure, but I have a massive incentive to work harder and be more efficient because the profit margin on the extra stuff is huge.
Precisely. It bridged the gap between socialism and capitalism without the shock and chaos of a sudden switch. It allowed market forces to enter the economy gradually. It basically taught people how to be capitalists while still keeping the safety net of the state plan.
And we can't forget the SEZs.
Special economic zones, a huge part of the story. They carved out specific areas mostly near the coast, like Shenzhen.
What made them special?
In these zones, foreign investors could come in, set up factories, and operate with very few regulations. Tax breaks, different labor laws, easy import-export.
So it's like creating little pockets of capitalism.
Exactly. They were laboratories. If it worked, they could expand the model. If it failed, it was contained. This is where the Made in China phenomenon really took off. They attracted foreign investors by the boatload because labor was cheap, disciplined, and the infrastructure in those zones was top-notch.
Okay, so that's the Chinese rocket ship. Built on a foundation of basic health and education, ignited by smart, phased experimental reforms. Now let's look at our neighbor to the west. Part 3. Pakistan's development strategy.
Pakistan's story is quite different. They followed a mixed economy model, which on the surface was very similar to India's. It relied on the coexistence of public and private sectors.
And the source talks about regulatory policy in the 50s and 60s. What was that about?
Yes. This was the era of import substitution industrialization, or ISI. The idea was simple. Stop importing goods and start making them at home.
Protect domestic industry.
Exactly. They put high tariffs on imports to make them expensive, which would protect the new domestic industries. It's a classic strategy for new nations trying to build their own industrial base. You want to make your own shirts, not buy them from Manchester.
And they also had a green revolution, right? Just like us.
They did, and it was quite successful initially. The introduction of mechanization, new high-yield seed varieties, and significant public investment in infrastructure like dams and canals led to a real rise in food grain production.
So the early years looked promising.
They did. In fact, in the 50s and 60s, Pakistan's growth looked quite good, in some years even better than India's. They were building their industrial capacity and improving their agricultural output significantly.
But then the pendulum started swinging. The 1970s versus the 1980s, it feels like they couldn't decide on a clear direction.
It's a tale of two very different decades, a policy whiplash. In the 1970s, under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, there was a massive nationalization drive.
The government taking over private companies.
Yes, the government took over capital goods industries. It was a hard swing towards socialism.
And then in the 80s,
A complete U-turn, denationalization. Under General Zia-ul-Haq, they started privatizing those same industries and encouraging the private sector again.
that kind of policy flip-flopping can't be good for stability or investor confidence.
It wasn't. Investors hate uncertainty more than anything. But there's another crucial factor in Pakistan's growth that the NCERT highlights. It wasn't just about internal strength.
You mean it wasn't all self-generated?
A lot of it wasn't. It was what you could call financial reliance on external factors.
You mean foreign aid?
Foreign aid, and just as importantly, remittances. Pakistan's growth, especially in the 80s, relied heavily on financial support from Western nations.
Largely due to the Cold War and the situation in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Its geopolitical position made it a recipient of a lot of aid. And at the same time, you have the oil boom in the Middle East.
Right, and a lot of Pakistani workers went there.
Huge number. They emigrated to the Gulf countries in the 70s and 80s to work in the oil fields and on massive construction projects. They sent back billions of dollars in remittances.
So the economy was being propped up by money flowing in from outside rather than just goods being produced and sold from inside.
That's a perfect way to put it. This external cash stimulated growth and created a conducive climate for new investments during their reform period, which was initiated in 1988. But it also left them very vulnerable.
How so?
Because what happens if the aid stops? Or if the oil boom slows down and remittances dry up? The whole economy shakes. It wasn't a self-sustaining engine in the same way China's manufacturing base was becoming.
That is a crucial distinction. China was building an engine. Pakistan was buying fuel.
That's a very, very apt analogy. And when the fuel prices change or the donor stops giving you money, the car sputters and stops.
All right, let's move to part 4. Demographic indicators. The people numbers. Because economies are ultimately made of people, and these numbers are just staggering.
They really are. The scale here is mind-boggling. Think about this. 1 out of every 6 people in the world is Indian, and another 1 out of 6 is Chinese.
We are the demographic giants. And Pakistan.
Pakistan's population is roughly 1/110th of India or China. Now, it's still a big country, over 200 million people, but it's not in the same league of massive scale as the big two.
But the growth rates, that's where the policy story really comes in.
This is where you see policy intervene directly in people's lives. China has the lowest population growth rate of the 3 by a long shot.
And that's all down to the one-child norm.
Directly. It was introduced in the late 1970s, and it was brutally effective at its stated goal.
We hear a lot about that policy. It slowed the population explosion, which was the goal. But what were the consequences?
It's a classic double-edged sword. The pro, obviously, was that it slowed the population explosion and reduced the pressure on resources. But the cons were severe.
Like the skewed sex ratio.
A deeply skewed sex ratio. Because of the cultural son preference, which, let's be honest, India, China, and Pakistan all share to varying degrees. Limiting families to 1 child led to a terrible bias against females. Sex-selective abortion became a huge issue. We talk about millions of missing women.
And the source mentions the sex ratio is low and biased against females in all 3 countries.
Sadly, yes, it is a shared cultural failure. But there's another major consequence for China that they're dealing with right now, a rapidly aging population.
Right. They call it getting old before you get rich.
That's the fear. They now have more elderly people than young people. This creates a massive economic burden. Who pays for the pensions? Who works in the factories? Who cares for the elderly?
It's a demographic time bomb.
It is. And that's why they recently allowed couples to have 2 children, and now even 3. They realized they were running out of young workers. The demographic dividend that fueled their growth is turning into a demographic burden.
What about the fertility rate in Pakistan?
It's very high, much higher than India or China, which means their population is still exploding. This puts immense pressure on their resources, on their schools, on their job market. They have a massive youth bulge, but if you don't have jobs for all those young people...
That youth bulge can become a source of instability.
A huge source of social and political instability.
Let's talk about urbanization, where people live. Living in cities usually means a more modern, non-agricultural economy.
Yes, it's a key indicator of structural transformation. And here, too, China leads. China has the highest urbanization at 56%.
And who is second? This one might surprise people.
Pakistan is second, with 39% urbanization.
Really? Pakistan is more urbanized than India.
Yes. According to the 2015 data in the source, India is at 33%. People often assume India is more urban because of our huge megacities like Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore.
But as a percentage of the total population?
As a percentage of the total population, Pakistan is more urban. This is a point that often trips people up in exams, a really good factoid to have in your back pocket.
Definitely. Okay, let's talk about the engine room now, part 5. GDP and sectors.
Let's talk money, the big numbers. China has the 2nd largest GDP in the world in PPP terms. That's purchasing power parity. We're talking $19.8 trillion. India is at $8.07 trillion.
So China's economy is what, roughly 2.5 times the size of India's?
Yeah.
And Pakistan?
Pakistan is roughly 12% of India's GDP, so a much smaller economy.
The trend analysis is what's really striking, though. China maintained double-digit growth for decades. It's just an unprecedented run.
It is. And here's another shocker for you, similar to the urbanization stat. In the 1980s, Pakistan was actually ahead of India in terms of growth rates.
Wait, really? Their economy is growing faster than ours in the 80s.
Yes, but that's where the paths diverge. Recently, Pakistan decelerated to around 4% growth, while India was hovering around 6 to 7%. China, of course, was sprinting ahead with nearly 10% growth for a very long time. It just shows how fortunes can change in just a few decades.
Now, this brings us to the sectoral shift. And the expert notes here say, this raises an important question regarding development models.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
It does. It forces us to rethink the textbook path of development. It challenges the established theories.
Okay, so what is the textbook path? What's supposed to happen?
Historically, if you look at Europe or America or Japan, countries move in a clear sequence. They start as agrarian economies. Then they move from agriculture to manufacturing or industry. And then, once they are rich and industrialized, they move to services.
Agriculture to industry to services. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. You leave the farm, you work in a factory, and eventually your kids work in an office.
Correct. A very clear sequential path.
In China, did they follow this?
China followed the textbook perfectly. They shifted a massive amount of labor from agriculture to manufacturing. Industry contributes a whopping 43% to their GDP. They became the factory of the world.
But India and Pakistan went rogue.
They skipped a step, a huge critical step. They shifted directly from agriculture to the service sector.
We became the back office of the world instead of the factory. Call centers and software, not shoes and shirts.
Right. In both India and Pakistan, the service sector contributes the most GDP, around 53 to 54%. But, and this is the massive, enormous but, where are the people actually working?
So the source says 50% of India's workforce and 43% of Pakistan's workforce is still stuck in agriculture.
Exactly. This is the great structural flaw in our development story. You have half the population working in a sector, agriculture, that contributes very little to the overall GDP.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means productivity in agriculture is abysmally low. You have too many people doing too little productive work on small plots of land. It's disguised unemployment on a massive scale.
And in China?
In China, only 28% of the workforce is in agriculture. They successfully moved hundreds of millions of people from the farms into the factories, which is the classic development path.
And this links directly to a PYQ, doesn't it? A question about jobs?
Yes, looking at the source 16gs3.pdf, there was a question that asked, how has globalization led to the reduction of employment in the formal sector? Is increased informalization detrimental to the development of the country?
So how does this sectoral shift connect to that question?
Well, think about India's leap to services. The service sector growth we saw, IT, communications, finance, is very high value. It generates a lot of GDP. But does it create mass jobs for low-skilled or uneducated rural workers?
No, absolutely not. You need to speak English. You need a college degree. You can't just walk off a farm and start coding in Java or working in a bank.
Exactly. Manufacturing factories making textiles, toys, electronics that can employ millions of people with basic skills. Because we kind of skipped that big manufacturing boom, we see this phenomenon of jobless growth in the formal sector.
The GDP number goes up, but the job numbers don't keep pace.
Right. We have high growth numbers, but we aren't creating millions of formal, secure factory jobs. Most of the new employment is informal, insecure. So you can argue that globalization in India favored the high-skilled service worker, not the factory worker, leading to this informalization problem.
That is a powerful and very critical insight for the exam. If you get a question on employment or sectoral shifts, you have to mention this skipped step.
Absolutely. You can't just say, India's growing. You have to ask, growing how? And who is getting the jobs from that growth?
Let's move to the scorecard that maybe matters most for the common person. Part 6. Human development indicators.
Yes, the real report card. And if this were a report card, China is the class topper. Hands down, no competition.
The metrics are just crystal clear. Higher HDI rank, higher life expectancy, better sanitation, lower maternal mortality. It's across the board.
And poverty reduction. China reduced poverty significantly more than India. They pulled hundreds of millions of people out of absolute poverty in a single generation. It's arguably the greatest humanitarian achievement in all of economic history.
But there is a surprise in the data when we compare Pakistan and India.
There is, and it's another one of those counterintuitive facts. According to the 2016 source data in the NCERT, Pakistan was actually ahead of India in reducing the proportion of people below the poverty line.
Ahead of India.
Yes. And in sanitation, Pakistan had 64% access to improved sanitation versus India's 40% at the time.
That is unexpected, especially given the big GDP difference. Why would that be?
It's a really important reminder that GDP isn't everything. National income doesn't automatically translate to better lives for the poor. Public health initiatives, sometimes funded by targeted foreign aid, can improve these stats even if the overall economy is struggling.
But there is a statistic where both India and Pakistan are failing badly.
Yes. Maternal mortality. Both India and Pakistan have tragically high maternal mortality rates, over 170 women dying per 1 lakh births.
And China?
China's is 27.
27 versus over 170.
It shows a systemic failure in our healthcare systems when it comes to protecting the health of mothers and women.
There is one area, though, where all three are doing surprisingly well. Water. The source says all three report high access to improved water sources, over 90%.
Yes, which is a positive sign, but access doesn't always mean quality or reliability.
Now, you mentioned earlier that we need to be critical thinkers. HDI is great, but is it missing something?
It is missing something huge. It's missing the liberty indicator.
And the NCERT source explicitly mentions this concept.
It does. And this is vital for a balanced, nuanced answer in the exam. HDI measures health, education, and income. It does not measure democracy. It does not measure human rights or political freedom.
So China scores very high on HDI.
But if you were to add a liberty indicator, measuring the extent of democratic participation in social and political decision-making, China's rank would plummet.
Right. They have high growth, but lack the constitutional protection of rights. You can't just sue the government in China if they take your land for a new highway. You can't criticize the leadership openly.
Exactly. Whereas India has moderate growth but maintains robust, if chaotic, democratic institutions. The NCERT argues that a true development index is incomplete without measuring liberty.
So the fundamental question is development just about calories and cash? Or is it also about having a voice and being free?
Precisely. And that is a deep philosophical question every student should grapple with. You might be rich in a golden cage, but are you free?
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together. Part 7, Appraisal and Development Strategies. Why did these three countries end up where they are today?
Let's start with the clear winner of the economic race so far, China. Why did they succeed so spectacularly?
Was it just the 1978 reforms? Just opening the markets?
No. And that is the trap that many students fall into. They think China, open markets, boom, success. The real expert analysis, which the source points to, shows it was the foundation that was laid before 1978.
You mean during the rough years, the years of the Commune and the Cultural Revolution?
Paradoxically, yes. The radical land reforms, the decentralized planning experience, and especially the basic health and education infrastructure that was built during the Mao era.
So when the markets opened?
When the markets opened, the workforce was healthy enough and literate enough to take advantage of it. They could read instructions, learn new skills, and work in factories. They achieved what the source calls a market system without losing political commitment. They had a strong authoritarian state that could dictate terms to the market, build infrastructure at lightning speed, and suppress dissent.
And Pakistan. Why the slowdown? What happened to that early lead they had in the 80s?
One word: instability. Political instability is poison for long-term economic planning. You can't plan a business for the next 10 years if you don't know if the government or even the country's constitution will be there next year.
What else held them back?
That overdependence on remittances and foreign aid we talked about. When you rely on others for money, you don't build your own sustainable capacity. And their agriculture sector, despite the early Green Revolution, remained very volatile and dependent on the weather.
Although the source says they are showing some recovery recently.
Yes, there are signs of recovery, but the deep structural issues of political instability and a narrow economic base remain.
And India. We are sort of in the middle of this story. Not the runaway success of China, but not the stagnation of Pakistan either.
India is the tortoise in this race. Our democratic institutions make decision-making much, much slower.
Right. We can't just bulldoze a neighborhood to build a factory like China can. There are protests, court cases, land acquisition battles.
Exactly. But the flip side is that perhaps that makes our growth more sustainable and more socially accepted in the long run. It's a debate.
But we still have that massive anchor holding us back.
Yeah.
The huge agricultural workforce.
We do. And our infrastructure, we are still decades behind China in terms of high-quality physical infrastructure like ports, highways, and high-speed rail.
I want to bring in one more PYQ connection here. It's a bit of a lateral thought. The source, 13gs2.pdf, had a question about India-Sri Lanka relations.
Okay.
and it asked how domestic factors influence foreign policy.
That is a great lateral connection. The question was, in respect of India-Sri Lanka relations, discuss how domestic factors influence foreign policy.
How does that concept apply to our comparison with China and Pakistan?
It applies perfectly. Look at Pakistan. Their primary domestic factor, political instability and the dominance of the military and politics, directly dictates their foreign policy and their trade policy, especially with India.
They can't fully open trade with us.
They can't. Even when it makes economic sense, their domestic politics and security concerns won't allow it. And that has hampered their own growth.
In China.
China's key domestic factor, total political stability enforced by the party, allowed them to pursue an incredibly aggressive and single-minded foreign trade policy for decades without any internal dissent blocking them. Their domestic health, or at least control, directly determined their foreign strength.
That's a powerful takeaway. Domestic factors are not separate from foreign or economic policy.
They are two sides of the same coin. You absolutely cannot separate the economy from the polity.
So to summarize this entire dense chapter, all three countries started at roughly the same point in the late 40s.
Right.
China surged ahead because they first built a human capital foundation and then unleashed a manufacturing revolution with smart, state-controlled reforms.
A perfect summary.
India and Pakistan, meanwhile, shifted to services, but left the masses behind in a low-productivity agriculture sector.
The skip step.
And the China model, for all its success, has a hidden and very high cost: liberty.
That is the complete snapshot.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought, something to chew on as they revise this topic.
I love this part. Here's what I've been thinking about. We spend all this time in classrooms, in debates, asking, can India replicate China's manufacturing boom? Can we be the next factory of the world?
It's the standard ambition. Make in India.
It is, but look at the year we are in. We're in an age of AI, automation, advanced robotics. The factories of today don't need 10,000 workers doing repetitive tasks. They need 100 robots and maybe 5 highly skilled engineers to maintain them.
That is a very scary thought for a country with our population.
It is. So the bigger, more important question might be this. In the age of AI and automation, is the China model of factory-led mass employment even possible anymore? Or do India and Pakistan need to invent a completely new path for development that the world hasn't seen yet?
Wow. That puts a whole new spin on our skipping the manufacturing stage. Maybe we weren't just late. Maybe we were just early for the next phase.
That's a very optimistic take. But we still have to solve the employment puzzle for the hundreds of millions who need jobs now.
Absolutely. And that is a perfect thought-provoking place to end. That brings us to the end of this deep dive. I hope your brain is buzzing as much as mine is.
It was a pleasure dissecting this, a really important topic.
If this helped you clarify Chapter 10 and gave you some serious ammo for your mains answers, please subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. Your support on Patreon makes this possible. We literally could not do this level of research without you.
And a big, big thanks again to all our supporters. You guys rock.
Don't forget to like and comment, head to the Telegram channel for the free notes, and practice PYQs. And for that premium organized library with those model mains answers, which you definitely want after today's discussion, just DM us on the public Telegram channel to join.
Keep learning. Keep questioning.
Stay curious. See you in the next deep dive.